Okay, so welcome to Illustrator. To get started, you get your homepage here, at least I think it's called a homepage, and you get various options. Now what you guys are going to be doing, you're going to be making a wee logo that you're going to be exporting separately, so you can just pick whatever you want. I pretty much always pick A4 just because I'm a creature of habit. So double click on that, and there you go. So like any other Adobe product, you've got your controls, well not any other, but most of them, you've got your controllers, your tools up and down the left side. You can undock that if you really want to, give you a bit more working space if you're on a wee screen. And you've got your menus up here, and then here you've got properties for whatever you have selected, which is nothing at the moment. Layers, if you're going to be using layers, and then libraries, if you're going to be importing any libraries. We're not going to bother with libraries probably, so properties and layers, maybe layers, definitely properties. So you don't really need to know what all these do. Some of them are really funky, like mesh tool turns things into mesh. You can kind of warp it, like morph it around. It's pretty cool. But for the most part, what we're going to worry about is the selection tools. There's two different ones. I always get confused about them. The shape tool, the pen tool, and then underneath the pen tool you've got the anchor point tool. Later on we'll have a look at the, where is it? There, the width tool as well. So vector graphics work a bit different from bitmaps. They're not made up of pixels, they are made up of anchor points. So if I get a shape here, I'll pick an ellipse, no, let's pick a star, because it's the morning when the stars come out. So there, and you'll see the shape, you'll notice these dots appear at the corners. Now these are called anchor points. I will often call them vectors, they are called anchor points. And then you've got your paths. So a path is got a vector, I've done it already, an anchor at each end. And an anchor can only ever have two paths, at least I'm pretty sure it can, attached to it. And that's what makes up the shape, is these anchor points. You'll notice if I hover over it, let's get the direct selection tool. If I hover over it, it's got coordinate points. So each of these coordinates references where this anchor is, and then it's basically a case of joining the dots, as it were. And what that means is it doesn't exist as a series of pixels, as like a grid of pixels. It exists as these anchor points. And one of the big benefits is that it doesn't lose fidelity as you scroll in. You can go in right into that, and it's still a nice edge. There's no pixelation or anything. So vectors are fantastic for being able to scale up and down. So they're really good for production print. They're good for web. They're just really handy things, and you will be using them to make a logo. So how do you manipulate these? And this is where your selection tools come in. I mean, there's other tools, but direct selection means you select a whole object, so the whole thing. Whereas if you go into direct selection, it means you can go in and individually pick each anchor, but you have to double click it, and then you can move each anchor, and you'll see the edges move along with the anchor, so you can choose that into whatever shape you want, really. That's working from a primitive. If you want to draw your own custom shapes, then you would use the pen tool here, and what that does is it just lets you draw any shape you want out, like so. Now close the path, and now I've got that exactly the same as this. You could even just reform that into that. You are going to get to the point though where you don't want curved, or you don't want sharp edges, which is fair. So if you've got your anchor selection tool and you select one of these, if you pull it out the way, then you'll notice these handles come out. Now, these are called Bezier curves, what these paths become, or what they are. So, whoops. And what the handles do is they basically tell the edge or the path how to react with whatever vertex is next. So the way it generally works, I'm not going to get into the maths of it, but is the distance between the two the handles on the joining paths here. So that anchor on that, I'm just going to call them vertices because I can't stop myself. And that one there, the distance between these two relates how far it is before it starts to kind of curve back down, before that exerts control up to like that point and that there, because they're kind of equal distance. If I move this handle up, you'll see that that curve takes a lot longer to come down. And it's relative to this difference between these two in terms of length, but also the angle. So if I move that up here, you see it's going to go up before it starts curving down, and it kind of balances between the two. It takes a wee bit getting used to this, but once you do, it's fairly straightforward. So that is how you manipulate a vector image, well, in its most basic form. There are various other things you can do. Things to worry about as well over on the properties panel is you've got your fill and your stroke and opacity. Opacity is fairly obvious, but we'll talk about that in a minute anyway. But you've got your fill. Your fill is what colour is in between everything. So you can't really colour in vectors. You can't take a pen or a paint tool and like paint a colour inside it. It just fills up, joining edge to edge, essentially, with whatever colour. And that could be a gradient colour, that could be a flat colour, that could be other vectors. These are just the preset ones. You can import your own and insert them. We'll talk about that later. You can also insert bitmaps, but they're not great because obviously they don't scale as well as vectors do. So you can adjust the fill and the stroke. And the stroke is kind of basically the outline. It's not technically an outline. There's a difference to it, but for the purpose, for what you guys need to know, is think of it as an outline. And again, same deal. You can just change the color. I'll make it a bit thicker so it can be obvious. So you can change the thickness here. We'll go up to 10, and then you can just change the color there, whatever you want. You can also hide it. You can hide the fill as well. So if you push this line here, which is none, then you don't have an outline. Oops, deselect it so it's a bit more obvious. You don't have an outline, which might be handy. Another cool thing you can do with the stroke is if you click on, I need to turn the stroke back on for this to work. But if you turn the stroke back on, you've got the stroke on and you click on the word stroke, down here you'll get the profiles, and down here you can do some pretty cool stuff. So there's preset ones here. I'm pretty sure you can download more, but what it does is it just changes the, I'll make that a bit thicker so you can actually see it. I've also not got anything selected, so it doesn't help. There you go. I've got to 10 point, make that obvious. Click on stroke, and then you've got your profile here. So uniform is just straight along. You can kind of guess what these do. So that's basically where it starts, which would be here, I think. It's going to gradually taper out and get thicker. And you can adjust that using this width tool here, which is, I always lose it. It's a kind of weird, that sort of tentacle looking thing. So with the width tool, if you click on a line, or path, sorry, just click and drag, you can change the thickness at any point of that stroke, which is, well, I mean, it's as useful as you want it to be, really, isn't it? So you can get some pretty funky shapes, but that would be a nice way to make hair, for example. So that's your basics, you know, drawing a shape, manipulating it, anchors, edges, or anchors and paths, stroke and fill. That's kind of the basics you need to know. Another really, really useful thing that you're probably going to want to use is, you can see the background doesn't move. It's quite funky, it's like a window. But anyway, I can remember what it's called, Pathfinder, the Pathfinder tool. So what you need to do for the Pathfinder tool, well, it'll be apparent what that does in a moment. So say I put that there, I'll put it, I don't know, let's make it a bit more obvious. I'm just going to tan both these and just get two nice ellipses, because ellipses are good. Everyone likes circles, don't they? So it won't work with one, because what Pathfinder does is it's basically going to merge or cut or manipulate one object based on the information from another. So if I select both of them, you can hold, oh, I thought it was Control, hold Shift and double click, or you can just draw a box over them. Then you get the Pathfinder actions here. So you've got Unite, sticks them both together. You've got, I can't remember what they're called, well, minus, so it's like a cookie cutter, it just sort of shoves the top one into the front. And then that keeps the intersection, and then that one keeps the not the intersection. So that can be pretty handy if you're trying to make elaborate shapes. You can just pile shapes on top of each other and then use that to merge them together to make something a bit more elaborate. If you want to move shapes around though, because at the moment you see that one's on the top, and maybe I don't want it on the top, but I was going to hide that film, it's really annoying me. So if I want to move the red one underneath, at the moment, there's not much I can do. If I go to my layers panel here, I've got layer 1. This is, we'll talk about layers later. You probably won't need to use them too much. You can literally just move them up and down on the layers. And then the yellow one's on top. So it goes from, it's like you're looking down at it on a table. So the ones on top are the ones on top. You can also go to Object, Arrange, and then send backward, send to front, etc. So there's 2 ways of doing that. I usually just do this because it's a bit more intuitive, I guess. So that's the basics. We'll talk about some more stuff in the next video. Talk about using text and a couple of what they call effects, which are things that you're going to be using. So there you go. There's a tutorial on my city, which if you've not done, you should go do. It's called the making fish out of circles, I believe it's called. And that kind of talks you through all this, gives you a bit of practice about cutting shapes into each other, reshaping things, etc. So you can have fun with that. Bye.